So as you might know, I'm an atheist and I'm pretty anti-faith and anti-dogma. And back in the old school YouTube days, I used to watch a lot of atheist/skeptic YouTube channels. I felt that a lot of those guys did a good job articulating the problems with religion and religious belief in ways that I hadn't thought of myself. And there are still a lot of great channels that discuss religion and skepticism like TMM and Dark Matter 2525. But I've noticed that as YouTube has gotten bigger and bigger, channels like this are like really niche and they don't really have large audiences anymore. But recently there's been like this new wave of skeptic channels. Some of them are channels that have been around for a long time that have recently rebranded, and others are newer channels that have just popped up in the last couple of years. But what's interesting is that although they describe themselves as skeptics, they don't really talk about atheism and religion that much anymore. Right now, I'd say the mainstream skeptic community on YouTube has found a new enemy, the people they call social justice warriors, or SJWs for short. Now, it's hard to describe exactly what an SJW is because it's really just a buzzword. At this point, it just means here's a person that says things that I disagree with. I guess it can be broadly described as a pejorative term for people who claim to be socially progressive, promoting things like feminism and civil rights, but at the same time implying that these people are doing so in a dishonest or irrational way. Now, SJW is generally used in a derogatory way, but just for the purposes of this video, I'm just going to use it to generally describe anyone that advocates social justice and supports movements like feminism, Black Lives Matter, LGBT movements, things like that. Now, being anti-SJW is not a new concept. If you've been on Tumblr or certain subreddits, you probably know this. But these so-called skeptic channels have sort of made it their calling card recently, and a lot of them have gotten pretty decent followings doing it. And I'm just going to come out and say, I'm not saying any names. If you keep up with that sort of thing, you probably know what I'm talking about and you have an idea of what kind of channels I'm talking about. And if you don't follow that sort of thing, then you're not going to know who I'm talking about anyway, but hopefully you can still get something out of the video. There's recently been a whole bunch of YouTube drama where people are calling people out and exposing people, and I just have no interest in that. I just want to make a general point. So anyway, this whole thing is very troublesome to me because skepticism is about thinking critically and being honest. It's about rejecting dogma and considering nuance and context. It's about doubting things for which there are no evidence. And I feel that a lot of these skeptic channels and the people who watch them completely fail to meet this standard. And maybe this is kind of a personal, selfish thing because as an atheist and a skeptic, it kind of sucks that these are the people that are representing us on YouTube. In most of these anti-SJW videos, they accuse people of wanting special treatment rather than equality, of being dishonest about statistics, and of wanting to signal virtue rather than actually improve society, among other things. And don't get me wrong, sometimes these criticisms are reasonable, especially when they're leveled at a specific person or circumstance. I've made criticisms of SJW ideas in my own videos. But the issue arises when you use a carefully selected group of extreme examples to mischaracterize an entire movement, meanwhile ignoring all of the examples that conflict with your narrative. I mean, that's just dishonest. I've been talking about this a lot lately. No person, idea, or movement is immune from criticism. But if you're going to criticize a movement as a whole, like feminism, for example, criticize the movement. Don't just find a video of one crazy lady and say, this is what feminism looks like. Like with me, there are several mainstream and well-accepted ideas among SJWs that I don't agree with, like safe spaces, for example. But my disagreement with that doesn't invalidate the movement as a whole. Sometimes you disagree on stuff. And yes, sometimes you encounter people who are dishonest and opportunistic in discussions. But again, this doesn't invalidate the entire movement. Another problem is when you use the supposed failure of a movement as evidence that their entire cause should be discredited. During the African American civil rights movement, the Nation of Islam was a corrupt black supremacist movement. But just because that group sucked didn't change the fact that the problem they were fighting against existed. It's a false equivalency, demonstrating that certain groups like racial minorities, LGBT groups, and women are marginalized and disadvantaged in various ways is effortlessly accomplished. The amount of evidence and research and studies is overwhelming to the point where you have to basically willingly ignore it to make claims to the contrary. So I'm very dubious about the integrity of people who boldly and consistently dispute that. Of course, it's not all clear cut. There are exaggerations and miscalculations on both sides, but some facts are just facts. Like, it's a fact that black Americans are pulled over, arrested, and killed by cops at a higher rate than white Americans. Even when you factor in crime rates among communities and among populations, it's a fact that you can legally legally be fired for being gay in 28 American states. It's a fact that women make less money than men for the same work, even when you take into account factors like experience and personal choices. It's not as low as 77 or 80 something cents on the dollar as some people like to say, but it is also not a myth. It is dishonest to claim that it is. But here's the thing, I guess. Nuance doesn't sell tickets. Trust me, I know. I strongly suspect that these guys, and I mean guys as in they're basically all white men, which may or may not be significant. I strongly suspect that many of them push this anti-SJW narrative simply because that's what their audience wants. It's disguised as concern for truth and free expression, but the way that these people fudge statistics and cherry pick examples and resort to name calling and ad hominem makes them just as bad as the caricatured version of the people they criticize. If they truly were skeptics, they would care about facts and they would understand the problems with ad hominem and cherry picking. But I suppose they have to continue this narrative if they want the continued validation from their audience, whether that be in the form of subs and views or comment reinforcement or money. And the fact that a lot of these guys are so willing to casually stretch the truth and in some cases outright disregard it makes them not unlike demagogues, playing off the prejudices of their audience for what I can only assume is personal gain. I mean, maybe that's cynical, but it's very clear that a lot of these guys have no interest in being honest. And don't get me wrong, there are modern skeptic channels that I like that I think are being honest, whether I always agree with them or not. But this trend of anti-SJW rhetoric, which is predicated on dishonest caricatures of social justice movements and sometimes outright disregard for factual information, is definitely gaining steam on YouTube right now and elsewhere for that matter. I've talked a lot recently about how discourse on the internet is pretty terrible right now, and I think a big reason for that is demagoguery, not only from politicians and pundits, but also from public figures with young, impressionable audiences. And again, I have no real solution for this. I know this video is very vague and there are no very specific examples, but like I said, I'm not here to call out anyone. Maybe in the future, if I see something particularly egregious, I will make a response. But for now, all I want to do is appeal to you, my audience, and encourage you to be truly skeptical and develop an earnest pursuit for actual truth. Don't look to confirm your bias. Look for what's true. And that's all I have to say about that. Thank you once again for watching my video. For those that don't know, I'm a full-time YouTube creator, and the only way that I'm able to do that is through your support, and a large portion of that support comes through Patreon. Now, Patreon is a crowdfunding site for people like me with ongoing creative projects. It's kind of like an online tip jar where you can set it up to donate just a couple bucks every time I make a new video. So if you find any value in my channel or my videos, or if you just want to support me, please consider signing up for Patreon. That would be super amazing and totally appreciated. But even if you don't feel like it, or if you can't, that's fine too. I just thank you for watching.